Good afternoon and welcome to the News Roundup for Wednesday, October 8, 2025. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Throw away the key. President Trump calling for the governor of Illinois and the mayor of Chicago to be tossed in jail for opposing his crime crackdown in the Windy City. A break in the case, authorities arresting a suspect and charging him with starting the deadly Palisades fire that exploded into the most destructive blaze in the history of Los Angeles. And the Kremlin is upping the ante, Russia issuing a provocative threat to bomb a NATO ally if the U.S. delivers a critical weapon system to Ukraine. Also, foreclosures are surging as American homeowners struggle to make ends meet, and a bride on a budget saves tons of dough by stealing her wedding flowers from the Golden Arches. We'll tell you what people are saying about the girl everyone's calling McBride. All this and much more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with this. President Trump now saying that the governor of Illinois and the mayor of Chicago, both Democrats, should be tossed behind bars for opposing his deployment of National Guard troops to the Windy City. Trump says that Mayor Brandon Johnson and Governor J.B. Pritzker should both spend time in jail for their failure to protect Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, officers who are simply there trying to do their job in Chicago. Additionally, the White House claims that both leaders are buffoons who have blood on their hands for their failure to do anything to stop the rampant violent crime that's plaguing their city. They say that instead of taking any action, they're simply allowing the violence to continue unchecked while they go on attacking the president for wanting to make their city safe again. For their part, both Mayor Johnson and Governor Pritzker are pushing back hard against the president's claims, vowing not to back down at all and accusing Trump of forging a path to full-blown authoritarianism by calling for the arrest of elected officials. Elected officials who aren't protecting the communities. Come on, guys. In the meantime, National Guard troops from Texas, they are waiting anxiously just outside of Chicago city limits. And that's for the go-ahead to join the team and become part of the administration's ambitious plan to curb illegal immigration and safeguard the place they call Shutdown. Both the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago have filed lawsuits to block the deployment of National Guard personnel, joining a number of other Democratic-led cities which have taken to the courts to oppose the Trump administration's efforts to send federal troops to fight crime in their communities. Now, in one particular case, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the deployment of National Guard troops to Portland, Oregon. That move coming against the objections of a number of desperate business owners. And they claim that right now their city is in full-blown crime crisis and that only the president's push to send troops to the area will help stem the tide of violence and shift things in the right direction. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Once again, 47 is on the job addressing key issues which all of us are deeply concerned about and doing everything in his power to make our streets and our towns safe for everybody. Tragically, while he's fighting the good fight, he's going against his city and state leaders who don't have his back and are complicating his agenda, and the only winners in this game are the thugs who run the streets, as well as their enablers, incompetent local officials. ICE agents working in the Chicago area have an extremely difficult job to do, and if that city's mayor refuses to provide protection for those federal agents, then they are directly responsible for any harm which those agents suffer in the course of their mission. Additionally, the Trump administration has correctly pointed out that Chicago is crime-riddled, has an absurd murder rate. The National Guard should absolutely be deployed, and both Mayor Brandon Johnson and Governor J.B. Pritzker, they should be held criminally liable for failing to protect all of the fine citizens in the state of Illinois. Hey, your thoughts and your comments on today's big story, drop us a note. We're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. Producer Davey, you are on the case, and who is up first on the big story?
Okay, Bill, how you doing today?
Absolutely fantastic, because we're halfway through the week.
Great. Well, here's one from Mildred in Milwaukee.
Hi, Mildred.
And she says Chicago has been a lawless and violent city ever since the days of Al Capone. The feds had to go on in then and clean it up. And by golly, they have to do the same thing now.
Yeah, even 10, 15 years ago, I had friends outside of Chicago. They would drive into the city for work, but they had to park actually several blocks away and make that short walk to where they were working. They said they actually quit. They wouldn't do it. It was just too dangerous to walk the streets of Chicago. We got to do something. Desperate times, desperate measures. The president is on the job, and the fix is in. It's a matter of time. Appreciate you checking in. And David, who's up next?
Okay, Bill, here's a bit of a different view coming to us from Benny in Austin, Texas.
Hiya, Benny. State your business, sir.
He says Trump is a wannabe dictator who's destroying our country and sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Mind your own business and Pritzker in 2028.
The president is minding his own business. His business is the business of the country, and part of that job is to make everything safe, city by city, state by state. You know, at one point, this guy, JB, who you're a big fan of, you think this guy's going to be the president? JB Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, and Mayor Johnson, they need to figure out why they have these high-paying government jobs. They were not elected to ignore crime, to protect the guilty, to victimize the innocent. They should right now be profusely thanking the President of the United States of America for trying to do the job which they've proven they cannot and will not do. They are not serving the city and the state. All right, change things up just a bit now. Turn our attention to some breaking news coming out of Southern California. Big deal here concerning an Uber driver who's just been charged with igniting the most destructive fire in the history of Los Angeles. Authorities now accusing 29-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht of intentionally starting a fire, which later morphed into the devastating Palisades fire, which in turn killed a dozen people and utterly destroyed more than 6,000 buildings earlier this year. Officials allege that the suspect lit a blaze near a popular hiking trail on New Year's Day, which was soon put out by local fire crews. However, they say even though that fire appeared to be fully extinguished, it actually continued to smolder underground before 6 days later becoming reignited by extremely high winds and touching off that brutal weeks-long inferno. Now, authorities say the suspect bailed out when he first saw what he had done before returning to the scene to capture the fire on video. They always come back. Now, they say he also rang 911 a number of times to report the blaze as part of a scheme to create the impression that he was innocent of the crime. Ultimately, investigators looking into the cause of the fire determined that it was likely set on purpose before eventually finding a barbecue lighter in the alleged culprit's car and tying him to the crime. Authorities also say they found a whole bunch of evidence on the suspect's phone which links him to the crime and that he told a number of incriminating lies when he was interviewed by law enforcement. This guy, Rinderknecht, arrested in Florida, now facing charges here in California, which include malicious destruction by means of a fire. Now, final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. This is a real complicated story, and according to firefighters, the initial blaze which led to the subsequent deadly Palisades fire actually thought to be extinguished on January 1st, 2025, beginning of the new year. Unfortunately, it was later determined that the fire was still smoldering underground, and later, when the winds came a-calling, that quietly sleeping blaze kicked back into high gear. Now, to my knowledge, when they're on the job, firefighters surround a fire until they achieve certain levels of containment. And at one point, a fire is considered 100% contained or completely surrounded. As a general rule, firefighters will use a variety of tools and instruments to closely examine the entire burn area for any hot spots or points of interest. And it sounds like in this case, it's possible they may have missed one critical area. You know, in time, a jury may have to decide whether or not the suspect in this case is in fact guilty, or if firefighters somehow missed something on New Year's Day, which ultimately led to a phenomenally deadly and destructive wildfire here in Southern California. The inferno, finally beaten back, but the loss of life is unimaginable. And rebuilding that community could take years and hundreds of millions of dollars. Your comments and thoughts on the fire, and we're curious, who do you think is responsible for one of the biggest fire tragedies to ever hit L.A.? Drop us a note. You're going to find us at newsroundup@gmail.com. Davey, to the email bag. I imagine a lot of folks have a lot of different perspectives on that one.
Okay, Bill, people are checking in with us on this one, and we got one here from Sam, who's writing to us today from Lafayette, Louisiana.
Hiya, Sam. What's on your mind?
Sam says that suspect is a menace to society. If he's convicted, they should lock him up and throw away the key.
Yeah, never play with matches. He's a grown-up. He's an adult. I think we said he's 29 years old. He should know better than to be playing with matches. Now, with regard to the initial fire, though, which was reportedly ignited by this suspect, we need to know what the purpose was. Now, arson is being considered. Maybe he was up there cooking something while he was hiking, maybe setting up a campfire. We don't know exactly what his intentions were. Second, if firefighters claim the fire was out initially on the 1st of January, should this guy be held accountable for what sounds like a secondary incident? So there's really a lot to take in there. There's a lot of things to be investigated and contemplated. We'll wait and see how this one pans out. And Davey, time for one more. Who's up next?
Okay, Bill, here's a bit of a different view from Sally, who's writing to us from Bloomington, Indiana.
Hello, Sally.
She says that guy who allegedly started the Palisades fire is innocent. The local authorities are just using him as a scapegoat because they need to blame somebody for their own incompetence.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, and I don't know that you're entirely right or you're entirely wrong. My thought just off the top is this is a guy who did start a fire initially. They're alleging he started the initial fire. The investigation will tell us exactly what happened on that very first day, but the fire was, according to firefighters, knocked down on January 1st. A new fire as a result of that kicked up on January 7th, so you could certainly tie him to that, but it almost sounds to me like it's firefighters who may have missed something. I'm not saying firefighters did anything wrong, but they may have missed something on January 1st, which was that hotspot, something smoldering below the surface. All right, switch things up here just a bit and take a look at a provocative threat coming out of Russia concerning their war against Ukraine. Weapons provided by the U.S. and a potential bombing of a NATO ally. A Russian lawmaker now warning that if we wind up sending a bunch of highly sought-after Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, Moscow is preparing to retaliate by targeting a military base in nearby Poland. The official says that right now Moscow is expecting those Tomahawk missiles to eventually end up in Ukrainian hands. I don't see it happening, but that's what they're saying. He also says that even though Russia not currently at war with Poland, they need to show that they're willing to match the escalation by striking the critical Polish military hub. In case you're not aware, Russian President Vladimir Putin recently warned that if we send those weapons to Ukraine, all bets are off. He says that the move will take this war with Ukraine to a whole new level while completely destroying the relationship between his country and the U.S. Well, he's already done that. Don't blame us for that. Additionally, other Russian experts argue that providing aggressive long-range missiles to Ukraine will give a green light for other NATO countries to do the same. They also say the alarming move puts a whole bunch of high-profile Russian targets in immediate jeopardy. I agree. In the meantime, other experts say it's highly unlikely the Trump administration winds up shipping those missiles to Ukraine in the first place. They point out that most of them are fired from sea, that Ukraine has a very small navy. That's actually accurate. And that ground-based launchers, they are pretty tough to come by. Final thoughts, a lot to take in this afternoon. This is the News Roundup Lowdown. You know, with each passing day, Moscow is becoming more and more provocative. Their war against Ukraine rages on. They've reportedly used their drones multiple times to violate airspace over several European nations. And their new threat is, in fact, terribly alarming. Another thing which we should all really be taking note of right now is Russia inadvertently threatening the U.S. by claiming that if we provide weapons to one of our allies, they may bomb yet another of our allies. And in this case, they're singling out Poland. Russia is spot on with their claim that they are not at war with Poland. Not yet anyway. So making that bold threat against a NATO ally will not serve the Kremlin well should push come to shove. By all accounts, Russia has suffered nearly 1 million casualties in its ongoing war with Ukraine. Their economy, it's struggling. Their war machine can't last forever. And if Putin expands his war to include Poland and perhaps even more of Europe, he may have a rather rude awakening. The combined forces which make up NATO will leave Russia outmanned, outgunned, outmaneuvered as well. Vladimir Putin appears to be biting off a bit more than he can chew, and he's leading his country down an unsustainable path. And some folks are saying that we're all dangling on the precipice of World War III. And what are your thoughts? Is this a regional conflict or a global disaster in the making? Tell us what you're thinking, and we're at News Roundup with Bill at gmail.com. Davey, this one is extremely alarming, and what are folks saying?
Yeah, here's somebody who agrees with you, Bill. Larry in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
What do you got for us, Larry?
He says, every time I turn around, Russia is making another threat. We should be arming our NATO allies to the teeth and getting ready for World War III.
Our NATO allies are armed to the teeth. I think Russia knows they have China in their back pocket and a couple other folks as well. But I think NATO is going to be something that Vladimir Putin was not exactly prepared for. He's no dummy. He knows how strong NATO is. But I think when he starts talking about taking Poland and more, he's, as I just said, biting off more than he can chew. And who's up next?
Okay, Bill, here's a different view from Solomon in Washington, D.C.
Hiya, Solomon.
He says, in this case, Russia is correct. By providing Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, we are the ones who are upping the ante, and they have every right to call our bluff and do the same.
Well, we're not going to, that's just talk. We're not going to really provide Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. They haven't got the infrastructure to use those Tomahawk missiles. Also, it's just a matter of time right now. Vladimir Putin, he's going to run out of soldiers on his battlefield who will die on that battlefield to satisfy his personal agenda. And don't confuse this with the Russian agenda. This has nothing to do with the state. This is all about Vladimir Putin. He's a real interesting character. You know, China, North Korea, and others who are currently in his camp, they may get wise at one point and turn their backs on him. And Russia, at one point, they will implode. A couple of additional headlines we are keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. First up, the shutdown of the federal government now in week 2 with lawmakers digging in and still no light at the end of the tunnel. However, some members of Congress, they are now meeting privately to search for a way out of the stalemate with a whole bunch of federal programs suspended, airports nationwide in disarray, and military troops unfortunately set to miss their first paychecks. Moving along now to some troubling news for the housing market, and foreclosures in the U.S. now surging, with homeowners throughout the country fleeing the pinch due to the rising cost of groceries, energy bills, insurance, and all the rest. And now a developing international situation to brief you on. Both the U.S. and Taiwan now scrambling for answers after a recent military exercise by China reveals that the communist regime is actively preparing to use a full-scale naval blockade as part of their plan to recapture Taiwan. The provocative maneuver is designed to encircle Taiwan, cut off their energy supply, and eventually put the squeeze on the self-governing island nation. We'll turn now to the world of business and a quick peek at a couple of stories currently making headlines in finance, trade, and a bunch more. Some electrifying news here. Automaker Tesla hoping to jumpstart their floundering sales by rolling out some brand new, cheaper versions of a couple of their pre-existing electric rides. And those new models, they're going for just under $40,000 a piece. David, we said cheaper models and $40,000. Since when is $40,000 cheaper? That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I agree, Bill. That seems a pretty steep price.
Yeah, get down to under 30, then we'll talk about cheaper. And turning now to a massive deal for an online giant, Amazon dropping nearly $100 million to buy a gigantic new distribution facility in Ocala, Florida, and that enormous new hub providing more than 1 million square feet of additional warehouse space as the retail monster just keeps on growing. And some not-so-amusing news to share with you now concerning the happiest place on Earth. Disney hiking their ticket prices once again with the top cost for paying a one-day visit to Disneyland in California, a record-shattering $224. Now, David, that doesn't sound so bad. $224 for a family of 5, right?
No, Bill, that's just for one person.
So a family of 5 is over $1,000?
You got that right.
Also, the charge for strolling through the front gate at Disney World in Florida, now tipping the scales at $209. I thought it was for a whole family, but it's apparently $209 per individual. Breaking the bank. And now time for a quick look at the lighter side of news. That definitely was not lighter. And here's what's shaking. Kicking things off with a boastful bride who brags that she was able to save boatloads of dough on her lavish wedding by snipping all of her flowers from the outside of her local McDonald's. The penny-pinching newlywed says she was looking for a way to trim her McBudget when she stumbled upon the idea of using the restaurant's beautiful flowers for her wedding decor. That sounds like a pretty good budget scam. Her allegedly criminal act has some people up in arms, with a few haters saying she should be tossed behind bars for her McHeist. However, even more people are firmly in her corner and cheering her on. They say the entire wedding industry is a bit of a scam, that the thousands of dollars charged for floral arrangements amounts to highway robbery, and that when it comes to ripping off Mickey D's, they're simply loving it, just like the restaurant's motto tells them to do. Hey, look, here's the deal. Getting hitched up, it's not a poor man's game, so you got to cut corners where you can, and if that means socking it to the landscapers at the local Golden Arches, then so be it. It's not like she invited the entire wedding party to McD's and drummed up a massive $800 tab and then did a dine and dash. Just a couple of flowers. Not like she rented a stretch limo and forgot to pay the driver. Also, it's not like those flowers would have lived forever. Davy, they wouldn't have lived forever. So in reality, she actually kind of repurposed the plants and gave them a second life. That is curious, Producer Davy, the over-under on this marriage. What are you giving them?
6 months max, Bill.
Now, I would have said 8 months, but I think you're spot on. I give it a half a year. All right, make the move now from the affordable weddings to goofy hobbies. This guy's got one that's mildly bizarre, and we're not pulling your leg. Check this guy out. A gigantic wrestler from Egypt who calls himself Kabanga is drawing massive crowds throughout his entire country and becoming a living legend due to his extraordinary displays of strength. I hope we have some pictures of this guy. The 44-year-old strongman has been astonishing the public by dragging his 20 cars at a time, hauling enormous trains along the tracks, and even pulling a 700-ton ship across the water with a rope held only by his teeth. You got to be kidding. Kabanga prepares for his performances by training relentlessly, hitting the weight room as well, and apparently like there's no tomorrow, chowing down on heaps and piles of grub. He's got an appetite like nobody's business. Also says he's just getting started. And that one day, looking forward to dragging a 263,000-ton submarine through the water. They're putting something funny in that guy's Ovaltine. You know, it's all fun and games till your teeth begin to break off and start falling out. Then what are you going to do? You know, I pull things too, Davey. I pull your leg. I pull a prank. I pull a fast one on you every now and again. But I ain't pulling trains, cars, boats, or yellow submarines. Now, long before this tough guy was pulling things, right here in the USA, we had our very own legendary puller, and his name was Jack LaLanne, and he looks just like that. He was a fit and buff guy. Rumor has it, at the age of 70, handcuffed and shackled, he towed 70 boats, carrying a total of 70 people a mile and a half through the Long Beach Harbor right here in my backyard, Southern California. Now, Producer Davey, you don't know this, but I did the exact same thing that Jack LaLanne did. Only when I did it, it was during a dream sequence on the big news roundup. And if I find tape of that big event, I'll bring it in and we can share it with everybody. You want to see that, don't you?
Yeah, I want to see that, Bill. I doubt it ever happened, but I definitely want to see it.
It happened. Don't be a doubting Thomas. It happened during a dream sequence. And that is a look at the latter side of news. Share your thoughts with us on train pullers or flower borrowers. See how gentle I was? Flower borrowers, not stealers. And we're at News Roundup with Bill at gmail.com. Davey, what do you got?
Okay, Bill. Yeah, we got a whole bunch of people checking in with us today. Let's start with Tim in Riverside, California.
What you got, Tim?
He says, you know what you call someone who steals flowers?
What do you call someone? Well,
if you can't afford the wedding you want, don't get married.
She's not a thief. She's a McBorrower. A McBorrower. And McBorrower is a copyrighted term, copyright 2025, by the News Roundup, all rights reserved. That means you can't use the term McBorrower without Davey or I giving you expressed written permission. And Davey Cakes, who's next?
Okay, here's another view from Allison in Salt Lake City, Bill.
Bring it on, Big Al.
She says, I really admire that bridezilla for letting nothing stand in the way of her dream wedding. However, the least she could have done is serve up some Big Macs to her guests.
Big Macs, quarter pounders, some triple thick shakes as well. Absolutely. If you're going to steal the flowers, at least show the love. Share the wealth with our pals at McDonald's, my dear McBorrower. And who is up next?
Here's one from Sal in Queens, New York, Bill.
What you got for us, Sal?
Sal says, thanks for sharing the story about the Egyptian Hercules. Yeah. Simply amazing. But if he wants to do something really impressive, he should try dragging my wife away from her soap operas.
You can't say that on the big news roundup. And soap operas are a great American institution. Dave, are you a fan of the soaps?
Oh, who isn't, Bill?
General Hospital, One Life to Live. So what are some of the other ones? It's been a while since I've seen any of those shows.
The Edge of Night, is that still around? Or
No, that's from the 1960s. I remember it very well. Yeah. Be kind to your wife. Your wife works very hard. She's a loving and dutiful wife. It's her right and her privilege. So once in a while, stop down, take a little break, and watch one of the soaps. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the Hump Day Wednesday edition of the Big News Roundup. And before we go, as we do each and every day here on the program, we share with you a very notable quote. And these inspiring words come to us today from a guy called Bill, I have no idea. Davey?
Bill, it's Gutson Borglum.
Gesundheit. Gunsud Glorblum, or something like that, who said a man's soul is strengthened by suffering. That means, Davey, I've got a very strong soul. Borglum, Mr. Borglum to you and I, was a world-famous American sculptor who created a number of public works of art throughout the U.S., perhaps best known as the man who supervised the creation of legendary Mount Rushmore. He created that, Davey?
Indeed, he did, Bill.
I thought that was a natural monument. It just all the wind and the weather just kind of created that. You sure somebody did that?
It's a national monument, Bill, not a natural monument.
That was a natural monument. Who knew? And now it is time for us to bust out. But before we do, don't forget the News Roundup motto. Ask not what your podcast can do for you, but what you can do for your podcast. What do we ask you to do? It's pretty basic. Simply subscribe to the program so you never miss a single episode. And yeah, our time is officially up. So have an awesome day today. Please stay safe. Let's all continue to watch out for one another. And Engineer Jamie, it's all you. Let's dim the lights. Let's fade to black, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow afternoon.